Formal welcome to this week's Wellbeing at Home event. And thank you, as always, those of you who come often for joining us. And that's why I asked you to put your videos on, because it's always heartwarming for me to see your familiar names and faces. And also, I just want to say special welcome to anyone joining us for the first time. I do hope you enjoy your first event with us and come back to join us for others. So we run lots of different types of events in the realms of well-being, from doctors to nutritionists to coaches, you name it, we've done it. But it's all dedicated to help you become or stay, if you're already there, healthy and happy. That's what it's all about. And that's what I kind of dedicate my work to, which is around well-being, and well-being is around health and happiness. So that's what it is. So before we introduce our special guest today, I just wanted to update you on a couple of things. Firstly, I know some of you have already booked a holiday with us, so thank you for doing that. But it is becoming much easier to travel in most countries. And they're easing their restrictions now. And the UK's definitely kind of lightened up with most things. So just to give you an update on that, there aren't that many restrictions around actually. And from the 1st of March, a lot of them are going. And spring is, I would say, energetically a really good time to detox. So whether you're doing that at home or you're doing that, if you want to go away and do that, so much better than January. January is actually not a good month to detox, no matter what the newspapers and media tell you. So if you want to go somewhere sunny to refresh and reset, we've got lots of different choices in lots of different budget ranges. So that's why we always ask people, like, what's your budget? And then we can work from there, because we try and have something for most people available. Okay, secondly, I made a reference at the beginning of the year that after providing free events for almost 2 years for our community, that we will be charging for some events, and some of them will remain free, like today, so we'll kind of mix and match a little bit. If you want to purchase a previous paid for event, the one that was charged for, on the top of our site now, there's a section on the Wellbeing at Home site, not Wellbeing Escapes, Wellbeing at Home, which says shop. And on there, you have the access to purchase a previous paid for event. And then we've got this clever technology that recognizes that you bought the event. So once you log in, you'll be able to see the recording there. And then also, if you have purchase previous events and you're waiting for us to send you a link, that's not how it works anymore. So you'll just have to log in and go to that event, and you'll see the recording there. So it will be easy for you to access that. And thirdly, we've introduced a closed Facebook group for our Wellbeing at Home community, where we'll be posting lots of tips and resources. So please do click on the link in the emails. We'll put it in the emails when I send them out, and join us over there, please, because we're trying to kind of build that community on Facebook. Okay, that's our kind of housekeeping for today. Before we start today's session, please keep yourselves on mute. If you want to ask questions as we go along, just put them in chat and we'll address them as we go along. And then at the end, we'll actually leave some time for questions, and you can speak your questions if you wish at that point, and we can maybe have a conversation then. So let's move on to today's guest, and I'm very excited about having Brita Fernandez-Schmidt join us. Brita, welcome.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Hi, everybody.
So happy to have you here. Thank you for being with us. And you have been a very big activist for women's rights and equality, amongst lots of other things. And you headed the charity Women for Women for a number of years, didn't you? Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your life and your work, your activism, and also a bit about this charity?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Stella. Yeah, it's so, one thing is so interesting that you often are asked to introduce yourself through the work, like the job title that you have, right? And I think that's obviously totally fine because it does tell you something about the person. But one of the, and I know we're going to come to this, one of the big passions of mine is that you are not your job title, right? I mean, you're so much more than a job title. But for the sake of answering a question, I will talk about some of the job titles that I've held, and one really important one has up until very recently, in fact, like 7 months ago, has been the executive director of Women for Women International, and I did that job for 13 years, and actually it was much more than a job, and it really allowed me to follow my passion and purpose, and that is to help women in particular, but not solely, obviously, because we don't exist in isolation, and help their families and their communities in countries affected by war and conflict to rebuild their lives. And for as long as I can remember, my passion has been to address inequality, and in particular the inequality that gender inequality that exists in our society based on our genders. And in particular, because I moved to Venezuela when I was young, when I was 15. My parents are both teachers, and we were living in Germany, so I'm originally from Germany, and they decided to move to Venezuela, to Caracas, to teach at the German school there. And that was a life-defining moment, which exposed me to inequality firsthand, really. I hadn't really seen it or experienced it up until that point. And that really ignited something in me, a real desire to kind of, wake the world up to the unbelievable inequality that exists and that really doesn't have to exist. And in particular, as I said, I really noticed then how poverty disproportionately affects women. And at the time, it was 70% of the poorest are women. And that is still the statistic now, even though the number of people living in extreme poverty has reduced, the percentage is still the same. So it just shows you the pervasiveness of gender inequality to this day.
So there's definitely more work to be done in that field. But so with the charity, the Women for Women charity, you would actually move around the world and work with women who have been through kind of horrific situations, wouldn't you? I watched your TEDx talk and I found that quite moving, around some of the stories you told on that. I mean, you don't have to tell them now, like they were quite challenging to listen to, let's say. But what did you kind of learn from these women who had been through these incredibly challenging situations?
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. I meant to say this. So, Women for Women International is an organization that helps women survivors of war and violence and conflict and extreme poverty in countries like Afghanistan, Rwanda, Congo. It actually started in Bosnia during the war in Bosnia. So I had the opportunity. Obviously, my main job was to raise awareness in the UK and Europe about the work and raise funds. But I obviously had the opportunity to travel to those countries and meet with many of the women who were benefiting from the work. And that for sure was absolutely the highlight of my work, to see how, despite some of the unspeakable experiences that they've had and the trauma and loss, how there was this deep power within them and this deep hope that their lives could be better. And I always thought of my work as actually investing in that hope. So I always was so alive to this hope, and that, I think, is the greatest inspiration that I've taken from meeting so many of the women, that we all go through times that are hard. We do. It's part of our human existence. And so I have too. But in those moments, I think of many of the women, and I think of their stories, and I remember the hope much more than the tragedy. I remember the hope that they always have, and how when you invest in that hope, you can improve your life, even when sometimes you think it's not possible. So that's been the biggest inspiration for me. And one of the things I talk about in my book that I've created in my heart, it's like a boardroom. It's like an imaginary boardroom that I have. And I place the people that I meet in my life who deeply touch me in my core and inspire me so deeply. I place them in that boardroom. And so when I have a day when things are not that great and I feel a bit down, I kind of feel like life isn't going my way, you know, which happens, I can just like imaginary go into this boardroom and kind of sit down. And there's always, the right woman or man or human just pops up and reminds me, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I read that in your book. By the way, I just want to show everybody Brita's book, Fears to Fierce, it's called. And we'll talk about it a bit more in a minute, but I read that in your book around your you call it the boardroom of your heart, which I think is such a beautiful exercise. And I read that and I thought, how beautiful. Can you just tell our community here how they can do that for themselves? What exactly is the boardroom of the heart?
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, it really is just you can do it right now, right? You can literally just say, okay, from now on, I'm going to have this boardroom in my heart, and it's right there. And you can, I even visualize it, right? So mine is pink and fluffy. We have like loads of pink chairs because I love pink and it's fluffy, and it's filled with people who just touched me so deeply. And if you read my book, there are a few women that I talk about. For example, a younger Beatrice who I met in Ethiopia, whose story just moved me beyond imagination. My daughters obviously are in their good friends, authors that I might read that really have an impact on me and change my life. And I want to keep them there so that when in moments of despair, because sometimes our minds can really take over, right? And we can forget how beautiful our heart is always there for us, because we're just stuck here. It's like this mind storm. I was just talking to my daughter earlier, actually, who was in the middle of a mind storm. I said to her, it's a mind storm. And if we can become aware of it, then we can find the way back into our heart. And then I always go straight into the boardroom and just see, who comes up for me in terms of the people that are in my heart. And then they talk to me and they remind me of how I want to live, guided by my heart and guided by love and leaving fear maybe to one side.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So basically you create a boardroom, an imaginary boardroom with people who have touched you, whether they're people you know or as you say, authors or whoever, and you have conversations with them in your heart and they put you back on track. That's lovely. I'm going to try that. I like that. It's a great one. That's a great one. So okay, let's talk about the word, or let's talk about fears. Okay, because actually before we talk about fears, let's talk about the word fierce. Because when I first saw that, I was like, what does that mean, fierce to fierce? And the word fierce can be construed in many different ways. So you can think about fierce as scary or powerful or aggressive. There's many connotations to that word. So I was unsure as to what you meant until I started reading your book and I started delving into your website. But maybe just explain to the audience, please, what you mean by that word, fierce.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so the word found me because I've been looking for a word that would somehow encapsulate what I feel inside. And I don't know whether this resonates with you all, but for the longest time, for really as long as I can remember, I've felt this energy inside of me, and I felt the kind of awareness that I shouldn't really let it out. That if I really let it out, then I'm not going to be complying with the norms and expectations around me. And so it felt like something that was really pure, and it wasn't influenced by social conditioning. It was like part of my essence. And obviously I have the words now. For the longest time I didn't have it, and I would actually kind of squash my fears, and just keep it controlled, because I felt if I let it out I would be too much, or and so when I started writing my book, which is really about this kind of what I'm just describing here, this like the fear that is in our heads, right? So I'm not talking about sometimes we're scared and it's for a good reason and it keeps us safe. So I'm not talking about that fear. I'm talking about the fear that keeps us from fulfilling our potential and keeps us from following our dreams. And so this is why I wanted to write the book. How can we feel the fear and follow this energy, this power? Yes, because it's definitely powerful, what we have inside, what our heart is yearning for us to be and do. And so as I was sitting with this, I wanted to find a word. It was actually when I was preparing for my TEDx talk as well, I wanted to find a title that somehow encapsulated what I was feeling. And I can't even remember how, but one morning I was on my walk and the word fierce came to me, and I was like, oh, that's it. That is the word. And then I started talking to people about it, and they had the same reaction as you, Stella, right? They said, but Brita, you're not fierce. You're really lovely. And I thought to myself, that's so funny, isn't it? Because that's exactly, one of the things that happens with language. We, depending on how you interpret something or the connotations you give or the meaning you give it, you then immediately make assumptions. And then you're already in this kind of conditioned way of being. And so I also felt that is actually really great. I'm going to use this word because it invites us to not make assumptions. It invites us to feel into what does fierce mean to you? Because if it means to you to be, then great. But maybe fierce can just mean that you're true to this raw realness in you. And that for me is what fierce is all about. But it also, the connotation with power is very important to me, because I believe that it is actually our authentic power.
Right. And I think the word power, I mean, especially recently, we've seen what power does on the world stage. But the word power can have bad connotations too, but it isn't necessarily, it's how you use power and your own personal power, how you can use that power for good. But again, it's the connotation around the word power being bad, and it's not necessarily a bad, it's the misuse of power which is bad, but the word power is good. But let's talk about fears. I mean, let's, because I put that in the email around recognizing your fears and knowing what your fears are. Some of us know very clearly what our fears are, and others have maybe hidden them because we don't want to deal with them. And Brita and I were talking before, and we were saying that certainly our generation, we were taught to just get on with it, just don't even think about that, just get on with it. And a lot of us would actually bury those fears because it wasn't the right thing to do. But what have you found with your work? Because I know you've worked with many people. What are most people scared of? What are their fears?
Yeah. Not to be liked, right? The fear not to be liked, the fear not to fit in, the fear not to be strong enough, to cope with failure. The fear not to be strong enough, not to cope with not being needed, anymore, maybe. The fear of change, but I think the fear of not being good enough. I think that for me that was always my biggest fear. And it took me a while to get through all the layers of fear to the kind of, what's the core fear that is keeping you captive? And the way that, and it really was, I remember I would sit on my couch as I was writing my book, and I would just sit there and I would just say, Brita, you're just going to sit here until you get to the bottom of this. Just go deep. And it really is, you can do this. You can do this with journaling, or just with reflecting and sitting, or obviously in conversation with somebody. And really kind of say, so I'm really scared that something is going to happen. Okay, but what if that happens? What's underneath that? And what's underneath that? And in the end, for me, what I found is that my biggest fear is that I'm not good enough, and that therefore I'm not going to make a difference in the world. That's how I uncovered it. And this obviously might be different for all of you. You might have different fears right underneath. But the key, Stella, and you and I talked about this, the key for me is that we are also fearful. We're also scared of our fear. And that's so incredible, right? When we stop to realize this, how scared we are to actually feel fear. And that maybe is the biggest barrier. It might not be the biggest fear, but it's the biggest barrier. And once we start to allow ourselves to consciously feel fear, and not try and make it go away immediately, or try and pretend that you're not scared, or just like ignore it, or whatever kind of coping mechanism you might have, or use numbing, whether that's with alcohol or with, or lots of TV, or whatever it is that you might do to numb this fear, and actually allow it. And even if it's just a small fear, then you realize, oh, okay, I can feel that fear, and I can definitely feel it in my heart that it's scary and it's heavy, but I'm still breathing. I'm still here. And then you have the opportunity to really get to know your fear. And honestly, I promise you, because I know this from my own experience, but also from the clients that I work with, that once you know your fear, it feels different. And it opens up space where you can notice not just your fear, but actually what your heart is wanting you to do or to be. And so this is what I say, that you can feel the fear and your fears at the same time. And that then opens up the opportunity to choose your fears. But what is so important for me is that it's not about being fearless. Because if we try and be fearless, then we know inside, but I still have fear. Okay, that means that I'm not yet ready, right? And so then we're never ready. And then we never do the thing that we so desperately want to do because we feel we're not ready yet. But if we actually realize that that's just a story, and that actually we can feel fear and we can follow our fears, then everything changes, because then you actually have an opportunity to do the thing that scares you, and you can feel the fear, and you're also at the same time you're doing it, and you can just become, and then you make friends with your fear. You're like, oh hello, there you are again. Like, I know you, I know that, and I know fear is going to come, so I'm not anymore surprised. I'm not anymore, oh my God, I'm scared again. Why am I scared again? And I've spent all my energy on like fighting the fear and thinking, when am I finally going to be fearless? No, what if we just say, okay, I'm going to be scared. I know I'm going to be, okay, part of the package. And now what I'm, and then you open up this space to, as I say, to follow these things that you really want to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, it's very interesting. I think the question I was going to ask you, this whole thing about the fear of not being good enough, or the fear of failure, or the fear, I've seen that. I also have the same fears. I mean, I think a lot of my friends who are open enough to talk about it have the same fears. Is that, it seems to be the dominant fear. Is that intrinsically in all of us? Is that something, does that come from the way we're brought up? Where does that come from? Because as you say, it's not the fear from protecting ourselves from a wild animal, or it's a different type of fear. And is that coming from our upbringing? Is it predominantly a female thing? Is it a male thing as well? But the men hide it even more than the females. You know, what have you found with that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I definitely found that fear is something that we all feel, but it's really to the point, how much do we allow ourselves? And that will depend on our conditioning and the kind of internalized expectations that we have grown up with. And what I have found to be really powerful is to find out, what is your biggest fear? And the way that I found it, I'm going to tell you this. So I realized it's this kind of fear of not being good enough. And I realized that I have this question in my mind: am I a good girl? Right. And so this is linked to my upbringing, which, was obviously very kind of, there were a lot of messages around, as a girl, you need to be a good girl, you need to be, subservient and pleasing and entertaining, and you need to make sure that people around you are, looked after, and that you are pleasant, and all of these things. And obviously I love caring for people, but there were also times when I didn't want to care for people. And so then you learn to suppress that, and you learn to identify that as something that is not complying, and therefore you shouldn't be feeling this. And so you start to break yourself into two, right? Mm-hmm. The one which is the kind of, yeah, this is acceptable and this isn't. And so right. And so then it's a lot of stuff that you keep there that you don't really accept of yourself. And so you create, as I say, you create this. And then all the time, this part that is acceptable is kind of dependent on approval from others, right? Because inside, you are many other things, not just this good part. And so then so in my case, the question that held me captive was, am I a good girl? And then I realized, Stella, that the issue with that question are threefold. Firstly, it's clearly signaling that I am not that yet, right? Because it's a question. So I'm definitely not good yet. So I'm living in a suspended present. But the key is that, who am I asking that question of? I mean, who's going to answer that question, right? So there's this kind of imaginary authority that one day is going to tell me that I'm a good girl. And then based on what criteria? I mean, I don't know, is there like a guide of what it means? And so then it's no surprise that because basically what happened, so these three things is, you're not in the present, someone's going to decide whether you are or not based on something that you don't really know, on some kind of metric, right? And so you have completely actually suspended your power. You've given your power away. Because, right, and so the key for me, and so then how can you not live in fear? Obviously, because you're completely dependent on something you don't even know. So there you are, paralyzed by fear. And so the key process that I have went through myself, and that I take my clients through, is to realize that the power is within you, and it always has been, and that actually you retake your agency, and you start asking yourself questions that you can answer, right? So I literally, I crossed out, am I a good girl? In the bin, boom, done. And now I ask myself, Brita, what do you need? Brita, what do you want? Right? What matters to you? These are all questions that I can answer based on my own values, and I can answer them today. So I can be here now. And now, obviously, this sounds all very easy. I don't want to pretend that this is easy. It's not easy, but it's possible. And I think that's just exciting.
It's very exciting when you break it down that way. It's actually quite farcical when you think about it. Am I this based on whose measurement, as you say? Am I good enough? Like, if we just take that fundamental one that most of us suffer from, am I good enough? Who's going to measure whether you're good enough? Is it going to be your neighbor? Is it going to be your colleague? Is it going to be your spouse? I mean, it could be a million different people. It's eye-opening. Thank you for saying that, because I think that's an amazing insight into something that we all suffer from. Let's move it on to passion. And I told you this little story, but I just want to tell everyone else like a little personal story. So because I feel like a lot of our fears are also inherited, because through how our family behaves, and we learn them from, or we can learn them from the people that we spend a lot of time with, right? So we can learn them from our social systems, our friends, our families, our parents. And I was telling Brita that my mum has a lot of fears. My mother's scared of many things. She's scared of heights, and she's scared of water, and she's scared of, you name it, she's scared of it. It's actually quite a cultural thing from the country that she came from. And when I thought about that, when I kind of analysed that, there's so much fear from people who come from Cyprus, and there's a lot of fear from people who come from Cyprus, especially women. They're scared of a lot of things. And then I took that back, and I was like, okay, well, they've been invaded God knows how many times by God knows how many, nations, and that must have been just passed down generation to generation in terms of just being fearful of your security, I guess. So then lots of other fears develop. And when I got to a certain point in my life, I realized that I had inherited a lot of these fears. I was like scared of heights. I was scared of the cold. you name it. I had these fears. So I wanted to just deal with them, because I became aware. And I think a lot of it's about awareness, right? When you're aware of your fears. So these are more obvious fears. They're not the ones that are hidden. These were much more obvious. I obviously have the hidden ones like everybody else, but I wanted to deal with that. So I went and did hypnosis for my fear of heights. But I told you the story about my fear of the cold, and I think that I may have told this story before on these sessions, but I had this fear of the cold. I was always cold, and I felt cold, and I wanted to deal with this whole thing. And I got into the work of Wim Hof, which is this guy who's this ice man who does a lot of breath work. And I went on this training session, and I had to do a lot of saunas, which I had no problems with, but then you had to go into an ice bath. And I realized that before I had even stepped into this ice bath, I was hyperventilating. I was crying, and I hadn't even stepped into it. And I realized the power of my mind around this fear. And I was determined to get over this fear, and it moved forward many years forward. I've dealt with my fear of the cold, and I have cold showers, and I swim in cold water, and so on and so forth. It took me a lot of years, but just that recognition. But the recognition that it came from my mother, actually, a lot of these fears had been handed down. So I just wanted to make that observation, because I think we need to look at our ancestral fears in a way, don't we, and recognize those.
Absolutely. No, it's just really interesting still, actually, two reflections on that. And I love that story, and clearly your determination, and like you say, bringing awareness to it, and then finding the right environment to challenge you into actually experiencing, and then your body actually is telling you it's not that scary. And like you say, that how powerful our mind can be in suggesting. And this goes back to the conditioning, and it's really neural pathways that have been laid from an early age onwards by your mother. And like you say, but it might also be that's part of that has been inherited, and that's epigenetics, and trauma. And at the moment, I'm actually training in collective trauma healing, and this is exactly what I'm learning, that we inherit trauma, and trauma is guarded by deep fear. So to get through to the trauma, to heal it, it requires us to go through deep fear. So I thought that was really interesting. And there's something that I've reflected on. I've got two daughters. They're 19 and 21. In fact, I was just talking to my daughter now, and she's in Berlin at the moment, and she was going to go tomorrow for a couple of days on her own to kind of more like close to Dresden, because there are apparently beautiful walks, and she just wants to walk in nature on her own. And part of me is really scared, because I'm thinking, is she going to be safe? Is she going to be okay? part of me knows this is exactly what she needs now to connect with nature. And I've learned the hard way, you know, over years of really tuning into this fear for my daughter, that she's not going to be strong enough to cope with whatever comes her way, because I also believe this about myself. And then I learned that instead of always saying, oh, be careful, you know, be careful, because what are we actually doing with the be careful? What we're doing is we're expressing our fear, right? That we are not going to be strong enough to cope if something happens to them. And so really it's about our fear. And so then I realized, okay, if this is about my fear, then let me deal with my fear, but let me not give my daughter the gift of even more fear, because she has her own fear. Obviously she does. You know, obviously she's a bit nervous about going there on her own. I don't need to also give her my fear so that she stays safe. And instead, you know, what if we just said, in fact, this is what I do now, even though it is hard, I say, you know, well, have fun, you know, go out there and experience what you need to experience. And in addition, I say to her, I know that whatever happens, you are stronger than you think. And we have this agreement, because she also sometimes worries about me, particularly when I used to travel to Iraq and countries like that. She was always really worried. And we would just have an agreement that she would also know that I'm stronger than I think, and that we can cope with hard things. And that is a beautiful way of helping each other let go of fear, right?
I love that. I love that. And I love the fact that you're, you know, that's really interesting that you're layering fear on fear by passing it on to your family, to your kids in particular. I mean, I have to keep my mouth shut all the time with my son, because as you say, your instinct is to say, oh, well, be careful, or don't do this, or don't do that. But that's just passed down, and then we're doing the same thing. I love what you're doing with your daughter about remember you're stronger than what you think you are. That's a really good tip. Thank you so much for that. Okay, well, let's move it on from fears and let's talk about passion and purpose, because a lot of us don't know what that is, or, you know, we're still looking for it. I feel like the younger generation have been primed more to be aware of what their passion is, or at least look for it, or there's more lip service, I guess we want to call it lip service, towards that. But certainly our generation, we weren't taught to look for our purpose and our passion. So how do we find it, Brita? Help us find our purpose and passion.
Yeah, you know, and it's I mean, there's a whole chapter in the book that's really practical, and it's kind of walks you through a step-by-step exercise that you can do to help you find your purpose. And I remember when I did this about 7, 8, 9, I can't even remember, years ago, and I was in a workshop, and I remember sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, because now you know, right? My thing is I'm not good enough, right? And so I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, I can't believe I know I don't have a purpose. I'm not going to find it. This is going to be so embarrassing. I'm sitting in this workshop and, you know, I'm not even good enough to have a purpose. You know, this is literally what was going on in my mind, right? And so this obviously might happen, right? You because particularly because this is like a big word. It sounds like a big word, and to me, it felt like, you know, only like special people have a purpose, or, you know, or purpose is like reserved for like inspiring leaders. But these are just stories we tell ourselves. Again, right? It goes back to, you know, whatever, we just make this up. And if you want a purpose, you can find a purpose. This is like, it's like not a question, right? And so the couple of things that I always talk about. The first thing is really just take a moment, close your eyes, ask your mind to be as quiet as possible, go into your heart and just ask yourself, you know, what matters to you? And you just write down things that matter to you. You know, what matters to you? And then the next question is, how do you want to matter? So those are two questions that are really simple and you can do, and you can see where that takes you. And then in addition, there are other questions that you can ask yourself and things that you can look out for. So one that I love is goosebumps. just maybe in the next few weeks, notice, when do you get goosebumps? Because I mean, for me now, goosebumps is like my body talking to me exactly about what what matters to me, and also actually how I want to matter. Immediately, it just tells me. And it's this kind of inspiration. And for me, inspiration is when you're like in spirit, and whether you believe in spirit or not, it doesn't really matter. But when your essence or your heart is touched, that's, so when you feel goosebumps, you're inspired. And so there's something, it's like your body telling you, pay attention, this matters to you. And often we don't, right? We're, oh my God, I got goosebumps, okay. And then you move on. And so now I invite you to pay attention. So that's another thing. And then often, the things that really matter to us have evolved as a result of our own life experience. Mm-hmm. And so there's an invitation to think back to moments in your life that had a great impact on you. And often they will have been challenging moments, right? Hardship that you went through. And then ask yourself, what did you take from that experience? And what did you learn? And what values did you take from that experience? So for example, I was telling you about this girl that I met in Ethiopia, and she taught me about hope. And it was a life-changing experience for me. And hope became part of my value. And so then hope now is a huge part of my purpose, that I want to show the world that even in the darkest moments, you can find hope. And so this is so this is an exercise that you can do. And what I invite you then to do is you look at the words that you've written and the sentences, and maybe highlight the words that particularly mean something to you. And then do some creative writing, create a sentence or two that kind of include these words. Hope really matters to me, and I, whatever. So something will come up, and then just sit with that sentence and feel into it, and say it a couple of times. And if you don't quite like it, change it, and then go out and tell people, and just weave it in. You don't even have to make a big deal out of it. I mean, it would be a big deal for you, because it'd be like, oh God, that's going to be a bit awkward. But it's not really, if you just weave and say, because my purpose really is to ignite the fierce in other women so that they can, fulfill their potential, which is kind of like a version of my purpose. That's my purpose. So,
that's interesting. It's funny because I've really realized it over the last couple of years, through COVID, that my purpose is around empowering people, giving them tools and as much information as possible to live a happy and healthy life, the well-being concept. And but when I say that to people, like, I know I'm really clear about it, and I say it to people, some people look at me like, what are you talking about? Because this is what I was going to ask you. We haven't been taught to have a purpose. We just kind of lead this life, whatever it is, we just go through life. And at what point do we then say, well, actually, I want to lead a meaningful life, whatever that may be? And, we can do that at any age, right? We can do that at any time. We can do that into our 80s and 90s. It doesn't really matter.
Yes, no, it doesn't. No, exactly. That's right. I mean, I was thinking about my mum. She's turning 80 this year, and she's just been through really tough health scare, and we're reading the same books now, and she's, I can see how she's really going deep into some of her fears, and really exploring what matters to her. And I mean, no, because the thing is, Stella, this is the key, right? Our purpose is an expression of our fears, of our power, and our power. And so I wanted to say this actually earlier when you talked about power, because I agree, for the longest time, I wouldn't even talk about power, because I just thought power is all I would see is power is abused. So therefore I thought power is bad. I don't want power, like get me as far away from power as possible, right? But it was obviously a very limited understanding of power, and it was very much a power that's linked to position. So positional power, power of authority. But the power that I'm really interested in now is the power that resides within us, that makes our heart beat, that makes us breathe, that makes us, be the person that we are. So that's the power that I'm interested in, our own authentic power. And my experience has been that when you begin to understand that power, then you move away from power by achievement or position, right? So because for the longest time, I think we grow up and we're taught, this goes back to the, good enough. You'll be good enough once you've achieved a certain position. Then you achieve that position, and then you kind of realize, well, I still don't feel good enough. It's because actually the power is within you, and it has been there all along. And if you then go in, then suddenly the power is by reflection. The power is by purpose. So then the positions, you can have positions, and that's fine. And hopefully you'll honor them with responsibility and accountability. But you realize that the real power comes when you fulfill your purpose, when you allow yourself to be, not to do, to be the person that you want to be. And you realize that just being who you are, you have an impact.
Right.
Right.
And this leads on nicely to my next question, which is, or observation, where you said at the beginning, I don't like to define people by their job titles, right? So I think, especially with women, a lot of women, become successful in the commercial world or, within corporations. And it does actually start to define them, because that's what they feel their success is. And then that's what they feel their purpose is. Is that, surely that's not wrong, right? If that's what they really believe in that. How do you distinguish between what is your purpose and what is actually just your job and your job role?
Yeah, exactly. It's such a great question. And I've just experienced this firsthand, because I left my job, in my big job title after 13 years. And so this distinction is that your purpose is about who you are. And so then the hopefully you can find roles that allow you to also fulfill your purpose. So I can be the executive director of Wonderful International, and I loved it, and I stayed there for so long because it allowed me to directly fulfill my purpose. And so there's a beautiful marriage. But I could also be doing something else and still follow my purpose in other ways, right? So then when but you do that, there's an attachment. You can't help it, right? If you have a position of power, an attachment is created to that power, and you also identify with it, right? Is with any role, whether it's the role of a mother or in this case the role of the executive director. And for me, both. So my daughters left in September, both left home, and I had lost my job, right? So it was an extreme experience of losing the kind of identity that I had for such a long time. Obviously, I'm still a mother, but it's a big change when your children leave home. And so that was really painful, and it made me so acutely aware of how easy it is to identify with roles and think that you are that role, but you are not that role. And the more we can bring awareness to that, then the easier it will be to transition and to leave jobs. But I think that's also sometimes why we maybe stay in jobs for longer than we want, because we think if we go and we're no longer that job title, then who are we? And I had definitely moments, Stella, over the last few months where I was just like, who am I? I mean, I don't know. Is this really hard? And so then I had to really, I would take my book. I would say, come on, Brita, you wrote this book. And I firmly believe, you
Read your own book, yeah.
But I believe this. I believe you teach what you most need to learn, 100%. And so I just said, okay, Brita, come on. You said you're not your job title. So come on. So
I think this is quite common. I've had friends who've been through this too, where they've left a very high powered job and then felt, well, what is my, who am I? What's my purpose? But then have gone on very successfully to find their own purpose. And it doesn't have to be in some big high powered job, it could be charity work, it could be anything, it could be whatever you're passionate about. But it's really good to be reminded of that even though we may be parents, we may be have our job roles or whatever it is, that's not who we really are in our essence. And that to look for what that is for us, it's really, really interesting. Is this quite a big thing with women that you work with, finding their purpose? People who've been in an executive position, who may be into their 50s or 60s and are now saying, what's next?
Yeah, exactly. And it's so beautiful. I love that. I love this moment of transition. In fact, I'm thinking of writing my next book about this. Because transition is it's an extreme moment of fear, but also of potential, isn't it? I mean, it's like heightened. Yeah. And I just think it's so exciting. And this is why I love the what I do now, because I still get to fulfill my purpose. I get to work with women and in all walks of lives and in groups and individually. And I get to really explore that power that already resides within each one of us. And in my mind, I create space so that the power can really come out, like the genie out of the bottle.
Yeah.
In this space, it's safe. And then we look at the genie and we're like, okay, genie, tell us, like, where do you want to go? What's the deal here? And sometimes like the genie goes a little bit back once the session is over. And then, but little by little, session after session, and at the end of it, the genie is out and is exploring and is finding different ways. And it's no longer anymore about right or wrong or good or bad. It's this kind of this binary. We just say goodbye to that. And what I always say is like, and I say this to myself, by the way, Stella, let's play. Let's play. Let's take the playful approach to exploring what I want to do and who I want to be. No judgment and just curiosity. And just that with every obstacle I might encounter is actually the way. So there are no obstacles anymore. It's just the obstacle is the way. It's there to teach me something. It's there to unlock something else. It's there to grow my awareness further. And that's really has helped me to go through the transition that I'm going through right now. And I'm still going through it, right? And we shall see how long this lasts.
Amazing. I've just realized we're 4 minutes to 6 and I said I would give time for people to ask questions, and it's been so interesting. I've just realized the time. Does anybody have any questions for Brita that they would like to ask? There's been some great comments up here. As Rosie says, feel the fear and do it anyway, which is exactly what you're talking about. And giving ourselves permission, Mark says, to express our full creative potential is very powerful. And I think that's the big thing. It's giving ourselves that permission. Because a lot of the time the fear blocks that.
Right.
Doesn't it? Doesn't allow us to do that. Empowering ourselves. I know there's we don't have time to go into it now, but I would recommend this book. I flicked through it. I'm going to take it on holiday with me to read it. But there is there is a chapter in there about empowerment versus empowerment, which I thought was really interesting. I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to do that. So yeah. Brita, do you want to just tell us a little bit more about your work before we sign off? Oh, Sheena's got a comment up here. Maureen, is there something you want to ask? No. Okay. Sheena says, my purpose for waiting many years has been my job and doing it well. Now I am about to retire and realize I completely define my purpose. It is exciting and scary, but amazing. It's like the start of a new chapter. How exciting.
So exciting. And you know, this kind of goes back to what I said really early on, like make fear your friend. Because that's right, fear and say, okay, right, what are we gonna do? How hard are you gonna make my life? Right. And yeah, allow yourself to play. I think of the world at the moment as a playground, and just see, you know, do you want to be on a swing? Shall I go onto the seesaw? You know, sandpit? But just play around and don't worry. Put your toes in. If you don't like it, go and put your toes somewhere else. I think that, you know, that we tend to think that we need to know exactly what we're going to do and then just do it forever. It's just, I think that's where my daughters really inspire me, because they make me realize that maybe that's not really how the world works anymore. But yes, I do one-on-one coaching, but I also have a group program that I've developed called Step Into Your Power. And I've got the first group of women who are in week 7 now. It's a 12-week program. And it's like the best. I mean, it's just so beautiful to see what can happen when we give ourselves time and space to ask these questions and to sit with our fear, but to also do it in community. So I do those kind of things. But yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. Brita's website, you can find it on from our website. We linked it, but it's britafs.com. Which is very easy to remember. I like that. I'm going to put it just in here. Thank you so much for being with us and talking about this very important subject. It's for me, this whole thing about not feeling good enough and the fears being just prevalent and relevant for so many people. And I think for people to hear that makes them, certainly when I heard that from others, it made me feel like, oh gosh, it's not just me who's feeling that, you know, it's just so prevalent amongst so many of us, that we can all come together and support each other and know that it's okay. Yeah. Feel the fear, do it anyway, or feel the fear and find your fierce for sure. So thank you so much for your time, your expertise, your inspiration, the stories that you've shared with us. It's been wonderful. Thank you everybody for coming along and you know, being with us today. Have a beautiful week ahead. Next week we have a lovely lady called Justine who's going to be talking to us about forest bathing, something completely different, and the science behind forest bathing. And also she'll be doing a lovely meditation with us, so I'm very excited about that, because about, you know, learning more about being in nature and how good it is for us. So have a wonderful week ahead. Stay happy and healthy, and see you soon. Take care, everyone.